Hello, and welcome to Terrain Medicine 2024, where we dive deep into optimizing your body's terrain for abundant and long-lasting health and wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Alicia Hollis. I'm excited to be presenting today's guest, Dr. Karen Curitin. Dr. Karen Curitin is a licensed naturopathic physician, acupuncturist, passionate neuroplasticity practitioner, and co-creator of the Wired for Wellness program. Through her own journey with complex chronic illness, anxiety, depression, and PTSD, as well as from treating hundreds of patients with chronic complex illness, she realized the profound impact that stress physiology has on all aspects of health. By rewiring her brain and rebalancing her nervous system, she was able to free herself from anxiety, depression, PTSD, and many physical symptoms and stress patterns and self-sabotaging behaviors. Dr. Curitin is now a firm believer that everyone with a chronic health issue will benefit from neural retraining, and in many cases, it is critical to healing. Welcome, Dr. Curitin.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Absolutely. You've done a lot. You've been through a lot. I can't wait to dive in.
Yes.
Absolutely. So, in terrain medicine, we talk all about optimizing your terrain to really be able to live in optimal wellness and optimize all aspects of our body, right? And so we're so blessed to have Dr. Curitin here today to talk about rewiring the brain and the brain's effect on the physical structure, because often we'll have patients that are on fabulous protocols and they really should be getting better, in our opinion, as physicians, because we've identified, which imbalances they have, and they're on a protocol for everything that we found, and we know their pathways are open and they're on really great supplements that should be getting them better, and they're not getting better. So quite often they have a block to healing or some kind of subconscious pattern that's getting in the way. And that's what we're going to explore today.
Yes.
Yeah. So Dr. Karen's really the expert in this field, and she's going to start by just telling us a little bit about what she does.
Yeah, so I think what you were alluding to is very much why I got into this work. I started out with just a regular naturopathic and acupuncture practice focused on treating these people with, chronic infections and all kinds of toxic burdens and hormonal imbalances and chronic digestive issues and immune issues all over the map, right? They had multi-system illness, which is what I had at one point too. So I was really passionate about helping people like that. And I just found that a percentage of them had, significant histories of trauma or had intense periods of chronic stress in their life. Even prior to this, it might not have even been happening right in that time, but previously, and it was still affecting them. Or they were just running these constant stress patterns, like being, completely perfectionistic and, overachievers and all kinds of stuff like that. We have definitely seen that people who are sort of type A, which is also me, tend to have more of a propensity to need this work, which is all about reversing the changes in the brain that occur when we experience trauma, periods of chronic stress, and things like that. And these patterns, right? These patterns that develop from our learnings when we're young about how to cope with life, how to move through life and get a good result out of it, right? Sometimes our caregivers will teach us those patterns like perfectionism and things like that. And we just carry them forward because they are deep in the subconscious as a part of how we function in our safety system. So what I do now is really help those people who are really stuck in their healing. They're doing all the things, from a functional medicine perspective that I would suggest they do, but it's not moving. It's not getting where they want it to go, or it's getting where they want it to go, but they can't get off the treatment, right? They're like, if I don't take my digestive enzymes, everything goes crazy again, or whatever it is. And so I wasn't satisfied with that. I wasn't satisfied with it for myself either. And so I just kept looking for what was the missing piece, right? What technique toolbox would actually work to get me regulated and my patients who are really, really dysregulated. And I should probably explain what that means because that's not a word most people hear.
Huh.
It means that basically this part of the brain that's responsible for your stress responses gets patterned or wired up in such a way through our experiences that it starts producing stress physiology in times when it shouldn't. Basically, when there is no threat to your life, right? That's what those stress responses were designed for. They're actually survival responses, right? Most people know them: fight, flight, and freeze. And unfortunately, sometimes when the limbic system gets wired up and patterned in a certain way, it's firing fight, flight, or freeze signals to the rest of the body through the autonomic nervous system when it shouldn't. When you're just dealing with having to get your kids to school on time, or, like your partner being mad at you or something, right? That's not a tiger, but your brain doesn't know that. And it needs for some of us, we get to a point where our brain needs re-instruction about
Mhm.
what is a true threat to our survival, and therefore what warrants a fight, flight, or freeze response. And so when we actually rewire that part of the brain, that stress physiology stops replaying itself on repeat in that person. So the person who was anxious for the last 15 years stops being anxious, and they just don't have to deal with it anymore. They're not managing it. They're not coping with it. It just doesn't happen anymore because they have changed the whole wiring in that part of the brain. And so when people get there, what happens is their physical symptoms also get better because this stress physiology patterning affects every single organ system significantly. So basically, our autonomic nervous system is also nicknamed the automatic nervous system. And that's because it controls all the major organ systems in the body to a very large extent. So when you go into fight, flight, or freeze, every single system in the body changes its functioning pretty dramatically, actually, to try to ensure your survival. But the downside of that is that it impairs normal body functions required for healing and repair and regeneration. And so that's why people get stuck when they are dysregulated, and why this rewiring has to take place for them to get well, not only mentally and emotionally, but also physically.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Yeah, because, modern day life, we have so many stressors that really can affect the body. And you're right, the body can't really tell the difference between being late, your car breaking down, and really something that's a survival, based on our
Yeah.
survival. And our adrenals, they just pour out cortisol, which is detrimental to any type of repair process, breaks down our bones, contributes to osteoporosis and osteopenia, and just generalized aging, and
Yes.
really is the breakdown hormone instead of repair. So can really affect all of these kind of chronic conditions, and is the opposite of what we want when we talk about optimal wellness and anti-aging. So
Yes.
just being aware of that for everybody. So this is really fascinating, because a lot of people are aware that they have these patterns, and they think, oh, that's just how I am. That's just who I am. That's how I've always been. And not that they use it as an excuse, but maybe that they don't know that there's, another option. They don't know that they can actually change their, responses to some of their chronic stressors. So how does
Yes.
one get started with even, you know, opening that box of retraining the brain? Like, yeah.
Yeah, I think that there are actually a lot of different ways to rewire the brain, a lot of different techniques and approaches at this point. And I've tried almost all of them because I'm just one of those people that wants to try everything myself before I recommend it to somebody else. And so, through that process, I have learned that some of the techniques are significantly more efficient than others. And basically, there's two main models for doing this. One is you just practice how you want to feel and behave until that becomes a new habit in your brain, basically. And that works some of the time, but some of the time it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't work some of the time is because you are carrying experiences in your memory bank that instill belief systems in you as well about what is normal for how you respond and behave, right? And some of those patterns have survival tags attached to them, which means that that emotional part of the brain is looking for and ready to respond to it if it sees it.
Mhm.
And so we have found that to get the best results we can for everyone, we use a process called memory reconsolidation, which is very well established in the psychology literature at this point as the phenomenon for how our memories change naturally. They change naturally anyway, regardless of whether we do anything intentionally. So if you didn't know that, your memories are unreliable. And that is very well proven by science at this point. So what happens over time is each time we recall a memory, it changes a little bit naturally based on what's going on for us at the time we recall it, right? So if we're really, really sad at the time we recall a memory, some of that information of the emotional state that we were in will get linked to the memory. And then the next time you recall the memory will come up with the memory. So the next time somebody relives the memory inside them, they may feel a little bit more sad as they do that. But some other ways you may notice your memories have changed naturally already is that you may be seeing them in third person. That's obviously not how you experienced it, or in black and white. Those are really common examples that you may have noticed inside yourself already have happened to some of your memories. But we now know how to harness the process of memory reconsolidation to make changes intentionally in the brain, not just to memories, actually, but all kinds of different neural networks. But we're mostly focused on the neural networks in the limbic system, this part of the brain that does the survival responses. So memory reconsolidation is basically the basis for this process where we are deleting basically all of this data in the limbic system that was causing the production of these survival responses over and over and over again in a person's life, and not under their conscious control either, right? We all know this. Like sometimes we have certain triggers in life where we try as hard as we can not to react to it, and we do anyway, right? So those responses, the only way to change them is to rewire them at a subconscious level, which is where they're coming from. And so we do this with the process of memory reconsolidation. And basically that process, what it looks like is you have to activate the neural network, meaning that let's say this is an anxiety pattern you have. Let's say you have panic attacks every time you go to Costco. How would you activate that neural network? You would just think about going to Costco. And you will most likely start to feel really anxious if you have a panic attack pattern whenever you go to Costco, right? So if you start to feel anxious, just imagining you're going to Costco, we know the neural network is now in an editable state and we can make changes to it. Before we activate the neural network, we can't make any changes, right? Which is why some people will try to like talk their way through something at a time when it's not really even present for them, and that doesn't do anything. So you have to activate it. It's like opening a Word document, and then you can edit it, right? So once it's open, we then start adding new data for what we want that network to contain and to produce going forward. So for that person that, you know, has anxiety at Costco, we want to introduce data of safety and calm. And we can do that in many different ways. We can do that through the body. We can do it through the mind in multiple different ways. In my system that I use, we're harnessing all three usually. We're having somebody do something with their visual system and with their auditory system and with their body all at the same time to basically send an unequivocal message of safety to the brain. And so just as an example, because listeners might be like, well, what kinds of things, you know, how different is this from therapy? Just to illustrate how different it can be, oftentimes those kinds of we call these pattern interrupts, these things that we're using to introduce data of safety. And usually pattern interrupts can be really fun. They can be really silly. They can be extremely calming. They can take many different forms. So like sometimes I'll have somebody, when the network is activated, get up and listen to their favorite song and dance for 30 seconds and come back and then do a visualization of a place in their history that makes them feel incredibly calm, right? And that is how we introduce new data into the network. It's really actually about shifting someone's state into rest, digest, and heal, right? Because whatever we're working on is one of those things that puts them in fight, flight, or freeze, right? So we're always trying to teach the brain no, this is actually safe. There's no reason you need to produce fight, flight, or freeze. And that's essentially the process of how we do it. But the person has to actually be able to change states, which is why so many of these other approaches out there are extremely inefficient or just don't work, like talk therapy. Talk therapy has a lot of great benefits, but it is not able to significantly and efficiently rewire this patterning in the brain. That's because it doesn't get to the subconscious drivers, because it doesn't create a strong state change reliably for the person receiving the treatment. And so if that doesn't happen while the network is open, you won't make changes to it, and the pattern will continue.
Absolutely. So you go in and you go to the place that normally would give you the anxiety, you open the box, open the neural network, and then you reprogram or repattern it with just feelings of safety and activities that are calming and happy. And then the brain can see basically a different way and associates a new feeling to that state. And hence the process of rewiring begins.
Exactly. And you have to do it repetitively. So a lot of people are like, oh, well, how is this different from me just like going and watching Netflix when I'm upset or running one of these patterns? And it's like, well, it's actually very different. The reason is because when you're watching Netflix, you're usually tuning in and out of your stressor, right? So you're not actually doing a complete pattern interrupt. Usually you're kind of splitting attention. The other reason is because most of the time, when you watch a Netflix show, you watch one thing for 30 minutes to an hour to 2 hours, right? That's essentially acting like one long pattern interrupt, which means you're actually only entering one rep's worth of data into that neural network, and you need to add a bunch. So the brain learns everything through repetition, right? So the process that we use gets people to activate the neural network, adds data of safety, and then we have them go back and recall the thing that was upsetting them again. And then we do another rep of safety signals, right? So it's like very short reps in short succession is actually what gets you efficient results.
So they do it multiple times
in one sitting, very quickly. Like
sitting.
in 5 minutes, you might do like 10 rounds.
Oh, and then when they end up bringing it up and they don't feel anxious, that's when they know they can test it out.
Yeah. So usually during that process of doing the back and forth thing of pattern interrupt process, somebody is watching their number go down the scale progressively, right? So that they're checking it every time they go back and relive the memory or think about going to Costco, whatever it is they're working on. And they will see, oh my gosh, my anxiety response to that is just going down and down and down and down. And then eventually it's like, oh, we actually ask our clients at the end of a process, try to bring it back, try to reproduce it. I want to see you try. Yeah. And they'll go like, they'll like try really hard. I'm like, oh, I can't get it.
Yay.
And it's so amazing. They can't believe it. And obviously I believe it now, but in the beginning I too was like, wow, I didn't know that was possible.
Yeah. I mean, it's the ultimate, right? Because you're fixing the problem.
Yes, you're actually fixing it.
Right. There's no, because sometimes even in functional medicine, sometimes we replace a sleeping pill with melatonin and lavender,
right.
And then, sometimes that works. And then sometimes it still doesn't, right? With folks with a lot of really kind of chronic conditions that have really bad insomnia. Speaking of insomnia, how would you go about insomnia because, there's so many people out there with insomnia. If they don't know what's causing the insomnia, right? They don't know they get anxiety at Costco. They don't know really what's causing the not being able to feel safe. Like, where would they focus on when they did their memory consolidation, or where would they?
Yeah. So there's a couple of, I guess, layers to that. Like if we have a client, let's say in the Wired for Wellness program, who wants to work on their sleep issues, we'll give them a structure for doing that. And the structure will be, okay, look in your history, see if there are any memories or experiences you've had with sleep that suggested to you that sleep wasn't safe. It wasn't safe to close your eyes, right? Things like that we find in people with chronic insomnia often. And not always, but sometimes. So like I had this woman once who was like, oh yeah, like when I was little, I hated going to sleep because my dad would always leave when I was asleep. And I never knew when he was going to come back. And it was really stressful and scary and sad and all this stuff. And she still felt all those feelings when she reflected on those memories from childhood, right? So that was still impacting her sleep. And then she had other things, like there was another experience where there was a fire in her house in the middle of the night and it woke everybody up and it was scary as hell, you know? So like those experiences can carry over into your future in terms of how your brain responds to the idea of sleeping. And so when we rewired those memories for her, she started sleeping for the first time in like 20 years.
Beautiful.
And she was like, I didn't even know I was capable of sleeping, 7 or 8 hours a night. I thought maybe I was just like one of those people that couldn't sleep because this has been happening for my whole life. So that's like one thing that can be happening with sleep. And so we look for those things. We also look for beliefs. People who have been chronically insomniacs, they have a lot of negative beliefs about sleep and about themselves in sleep, right? So usually it'll be like, I'm a bad sleeper. I can't sleep unless I XYZ, right? It'll be like, I have to have the perfect conditions. I have to be able to control everything. Oh, I have to have ambient, And so sometimes our beliefs are actually what's getting in the way of us being able to be calm and feel relaxed when it comes to sleep, but that's obviously necessary. The more that we try to control sleep, the worse it gets. And that is because essentially you're saying to the brain, this is a threat to me. I need to control it because it's dangerous, right? And so the brain then goes, oh, sleep's dangerous? Cool, we'll protect you from it. We'll just keep you awake and keep you really alert and hyper alert and make sure that sleep never gets you.
Yeah.
Right? Sleep can be the tiger to your brain.
Yeah, it's just trying to protect you. It's just trying to keep you safe. And
Yeah.
we don't even know we're doing these things.
Exactly. It's all subconscious.
Don't
Yes.
even know.
So we have to do a little exploring of ourselves sometimes to realize, oh my gosh, that is what I'm doing in my head. I didn't even realize, Oftentimes people have thought patterns too that fuel insomnia, right? As the day goes on, they get more and more anxious and they start thinking, am I going to be able to sleep tonight? What if I don't sleep tonight? Tomorrow's going to be terrible. Am I going to be able to make it to work? Blah, blah, blah. The whole thing. And that sort of inner dialogue continues to reinforce to the brain how unsafe sleep is. So we have to break that rumination pattern as well. So finally, the last thing I would say about sleep is that sometimes it's just because the person's nervous system is dysregulated for another reason. Because we know that if you're in fight or flight, you're not sleeping. You're not going to be able to sleep. And so if you're in fight or flight for any other reason, that could be what's going on for you, right? So sometimes we have people enter the program and they're like, I haven't slept for however long because my work is stressing me out so much, right? So in their case, we'll be like, oh, well, it makes sense for you to go after and work on your stress response to work first. And oftentimes that leads to them sleeping, and very quickly. Many times our members, when they first get started with insomnia, they are usually starting to get good sleep within the first week, is what we are getting feedback from them saying.
Oh, wow. That's phenomenal results.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because if we can't sleep, we can't heal.
Yes, exactly.
That was so many, many patients that they're not sleeping and nothing's going to work right. You can only be so healthy when you're not
if you have bad sleep. 100%.
Exactly. So that's super helpful. And what great results, really.
Yeah. Certain things are really fast to change, like insomnia, migraines, somebody's anxiety and depression. Those things often do shift very quickly. Some of the things that tend to take longer, and I think, and I'll explain the reason for this, are things like chronic infections, hormonal imbalances, sometimes actually nutrient deficiencies of certain kinds correct themselves, right? Because the person's not drawing on or needing as many nutrients because they're not running stress physiology, right? So some of those things take time of doing the retraining. And I think the reason is because oftentimes when people start, they're dysregulated almost all the time, almost 24/7. That's our most common scenario of a member. And so what happens as you start rewiring your stress programming is you get progressively longer and longer periods of time of regulation. But in the beginning, those periods are short. And so they build as your brain basically develops this new neural habit of remaining calm and regulated in a variety of situations in your life. And so as you get to that state of more regulation, then, longer periods of time, then you can imagine your immune system can also function optimally for longer periods of time. Your hormonal system for longer periods of time, all systems really can function more normally on a regular basis at that point. So that takes more time.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, because we do a lot of mold medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And so clearly, when mold sensitive patients are exposed to mold, it can take just seconds for them to have neurologic changes, immediate brain fog, immediate numbness or tingling in a body part. Is this process helpful for them to desensitize their overreactive nature to that? Because that would really help a lot of patients out there that really have to be pristine with their exposures. Not saying we can go live in a moldy environment, but maybe
Yes.
they can stay in a hotel without bringing their own air purifiers and things like that. So tell me
Yes.
a little bit more about that.
Yeah, 100%. I was mold sick myself for
Ah,
many years, and it was one of the things I recovered from, and partly through this work.
yeah,
So that wasn't the only thing I did. I did functional medicine things as well, like, the detox protocols
sure.
and, killing the fungus in my sinuses and gut and things like that. And those were important and necessary. However, the thing that those tools could not address was the sensitivity piece.
Mhm.
And as a result of mold, we call it the great sensitizer, right? I developed sensitivities and allergies to so many different things while I was mold sick, so many foods, like all kinds of substances that tend to be moldy, like wood pulp and paper and stuff like that. It was bizarre and really
Paper.
intense. What's that?
You were allergic to paper?
Yeah, I
Oh
was
my
allergic to paper and wood pulp, and there was something else like that tends to be moldy. I can't remember what it was, but yeah. So, and on top of that, of course, I had the extreme sensitivity to mold, right? That most people have. I also developed EMF sensitivity, which is also
right.
really common with mold. So, what happened for me is that I realized as soon as I started doing neural retraining, because I was still mold sick at that time, that I had basically set up limbic sensitivity to mold for myself. And most of us do this unintentionally when we get mold sick, right? We often develop fear of mold and avoidance behaviors around mold. And unfortunately, if we do a lot of that in the beginning, we just repeat that over and over again, we essentially set up a brain habit, right? The brain gets better at anything it practices. So if you practice being extremely anxious about mold for a long period of time, the brain is going to get better and better and better at trying to, quote, protect you from mold by creating a reaction for you when it's present or even when you think it's present. So I actually had experiences for myself where I realized I was having a reaction just from the perception of exposure when I wasn't actually exposed.
Oh, wow.
And when people look for that and they have these sort of tools for helping them figure that out, they realize they're doing that. Most people their brains are doing that. They're not doing that intentionally. Their subconscious is doing that. So, neural retraining is the best way, if not the only way, that I know of reversing a limbic sensitivity to mold. And as a result of doing that, what happens is the immune sensitivity also reverses. So, some people out there are probably struggling with mold and mast cell,
Correct.
right? We know a ton of mast cells hang out in the limbic system of the brain, right next to the areas that produce our stress responses. And they have CRH, which is a compound that's produced during our stress responses. They have receptors for that on them. So they actually respond in an immune way to our nervous system stress responses. So the two actually work together to try to protect us all the time. But what that means is that if you have an immune sensitivity that's developed to mold, like you have massive mast cell reactions to it when you're around it, that is tied into limbic sensitivity. And the best way to reverse it, in my mind, is through rewiring that limbic sensitivity first. Because if you don't, the immune sensitivity will never stop.
Mm-hmm. There always
And
be some.
that's what we see in our patients.
Yeah. And then it just can get worse with just different sensitivities because it's already hypersensitized to go down that pathway.
Exactly. So usually once somebody's brain is in that hypersensitized state where it's perceiving danger everywhere, then they develop even more sensitivities. It just blows up, just expands until people are, you know, having to wear a respirator everywhere they go from multiple chemical sensitivity. And I just want people to know that all those sensitivities are really, really effectively addressed with neural retraining, but you do have to get out of the moldy environment and not be in it all the time.
Yeah. And they do that same kind of memory consolidation process, or are there other techniques?
Yes, there are definitely other techniques, but that is part of it. You know, many people feel legitimately traumatized by their experience with mold. I
Mhm.
felt that way. It was one of the hardest things I've ever been through in my life. And it wasn't just about feeling sick. You know, most people have to move or totally tear up their house to fix the issue, right? They have to spend all their savings. They have to give up all their stuff that they're attached to and love, right? And so that is what instills the fear that continues to perpetuate the sensitivity. So, in order for them to be able to reverse that fear response to mold and therefore the sensitivity, they have to deal with the trauma. That's what started it. And it's really easy to rewire. So it's actually a very fast process. I've done it with a bunch of people.
And they do it a couple of times until it doesn't hit them so hard and they're not triggered.
Yes. So after you work on the trauma and the belief systems and things like that, then you can go on to what we call incremental training, which means that you start by imagining you had an exposure, notice what reaction you have, rewire that while it's happening,
Oh,
right?
that's fascinating.
Do
They're
and
imagining they're having an exposure and seeing if they develop that kind of symptom.
reaction. Exactly. And it happens very
Oh,
reliably in people with mold sensitivity. They're like, oh my God, I'm itching, and you're just like, yeah, you just were thinking about mold. So,
oh,
I mean, people will develop straight up rashes sometimes when they do these exercises. They'll start having a hives. And
yeah.
so it's amazing. The brain is incredibly powerful, but you can reverse all of that just by convincing it that there's no reason to have a stress response and that we can think about mold and stay calm, right? So that's the first step of incremental training, but then it progresses to small, tiny exposures, right? So person walks into a vintage store for 5 seconds, walks out, is having a reaction, rewires it, right? Walks into the vintage store for 15 seconds, has a little bit more reaction, rewires it, right? And so eventually you get to the point where that person can go into the environment and have no reaction at all. But the reason we go slowly with that and we do it incrementally is so that we don't rescare, re traumatize along the way, because then you set yourself back. So it just slows things down ultimately.
And they're doing that in their head, right? They're going into the
Mhm.
vintage store in their head.
Oh, no, I mean,
Oh,
eventually they actually go into the vintage store, right? This is
and they
how
don't
you
even
get
have a
somebody
reaction.
to,
They don't have
yeah,
a reaction at
yeah,
all.
this is how you get somebody to not have a
Oh,
reaction. Yeah.
fascinating.
It's a very reliable process. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's kind of amazing, actually. I
It's
think that's
very cool.
going to give folks a lot of hope, because there are a lot of people that feel like they can't do certain things and, you know, experience certain things just because of a lot of their sensitivities.
Yeah, and mine are all gone now.
Yeah.
All of them. And that wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, people feel like they can't go out to eat or do this because they've got, you know, uh, sensitivities just to different types of, oils or what have you.
I
Uh,
know, and I think that's tragic, Yeah, there's a lot of unhealthy stuff in our food supply, but we are much more tolerant and resilient than we think,
exactly.
and we don't need to be having these big reactions to foods.
Right. And when we get healthier in one regard and we have more experience staying that way, right, then it just kind of compounds and the body gets even more resilient and more resilient and more resilient.
Yes, 100%. As you check one box, it
Right.
becomes possible to check three more. And
Exactly.
so that I love that about this work is it's like opening the dam and then it's everything else goes easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like it's complementary to, all of the other functional,
It's a
work,
must.
because
Mhm.
you do need, the physical binders and the physical, support to kind of help the liver and things like that for a lot of these different things that we deal with, kind of chronic toxins and infections and all of those things. Sometimes we bring killers on board and things like that to get rid of the yeast or the Lyme or the what have you. So,
And I
uh,
think like one of the things people don't realize though is that your immune system and your detox pathways work dramatically better when you are regulated. And
mhm.
so we see people like at a snail's pace with their detox for years before they start doing this work, and then they get regulated and they can take all the detox supplements and be totally fine with it, and everything just speeds up.
Instead of, oh, I can't take that I'm sensitive to chlorella,
Mhm.
or that makes me sick, this,
Mhm.
all these different things make me sick. It's like
Yes.
it's regulated, and then they can be more resilient with just even their different supplements, right?
Yes, exactly. We help a lot of people who are hypersensitive to all kinds of treatments, and that is why they're stalled,
This
right?
is
And this is almost always the reason.
Yeah, well, fascinating. uh, it's really just complementary to all the other modalities, and so I love.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for bringing all this information.
You're
Um,
so welcome.
you've really, opened the eyes, I think, to a lot of our listeners to what's really possible with our brains. Our brains are the most powerful tool.
Yes.
Our bodies are so amazing. And, I say this over and over again, our bodies just want to be well. Our bodies
Yes.
honestly are here to support us, and they really just want to be well, and everything that our bodies do is to protect us, to ensure our survival here on the planet. And so uh, working with the body in all different aspects is really the only way to be well and stay well.
Yes, to enhance our own natural healing mechanisms. It always works the best.
Exactly.
Trying to take over for the body, we know very well that that usually causes a lot of side effects, and it often doesn't work that well. But
Exactly.
you're right. If we can figure out what the body wants to do on its own and help it do that, that always produces the best results. So this is one of those things, and I love it because it's so safe. There is really no downside, and it's a physician do no harm approach, which I've always been all about that.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, tell us about the free gift that you are gifting to our listeners today.
Yeah, so we have created a couple of free courses for people to learn about, how nervous system regulations works, what kind of health conditions you might have if you are dysregulated, and how do you resolve that, right? And so in those free courses, we also give you a bunch of free neural retraining processes so you can try it out. So you can see what it's like, right? Because a lot of
Wonderful.
people ask, like, I don't really get it. Is it like therapy? Is it like meditation? And they just don't have a concept for the experience. So we decided to just give that to you so you can experience it. And we suggest that when you use the processes, do it on something that legitimately stresses you out, right? Activate a neural network before you start the process so that you can see the results at the end of having rewired whatever that is. So we think that you will love these processes. We're getting incredible feedback from them. So it's pretty cool. So you can find those at the link that we provided. I think you'll probably post that.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing all of this wonderful information with us, as well as your free gift. And thanks for being here today. And as a friendly reminder, you have the option to purchase the entire season of Terrain Medicine 2024 so that you can have unlimited access to each powerful conversation. And that information will also be available with Karen's free gift today. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.